The latest official figures show millions of Americans returned to work last month as states began reopening following months of lockdowns. The Bureau of Labor Statistics monthly report shows the US added 4.8 million jobs in June, far exceeding economists' expectations. It's the second month of gains since more than 20 million jobs were lost in April. That takes the US unemployment rate down to 11.1% from 13.3% in May. But it still remains higher than any other period since the Second World War. And last week, more than 1.4 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits. That brings the total number of claims since the coronavirus pandemic hit to around 50 million.
This is the largest monthly jobs gain in the history of our country. 7.5 million jobs created in the last 2 months alone. Today's announcement proves that our economy is roaring back. It's coming back extremely strong.
Well, for more, I'm joined by Gene Epstein in New York. He's Director and Moderator of the Soho House Forum and former Chief Economist at the New York Stock Exchange. He's also the former Economics Editor at Barron's magazine. Welcome to Money Talks, Gene. Now, as we know, the May monthly jobs report really took everyone by surprise. Analysts were expecting millions of jobs to have been lost in May, yet it showed around 2.5 million were added. This time round, the monthly jobs report also smashed expectations, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, it didn't really, neither report surprised me especially. I've called this economic downturn not the Great Recession or the Great Depression, but the Great Suppression. It is unusual and unprecedented and sui generis in the sense that it was essentially brought about by a suppression of economic activity by government. And that meant that the businesses that were in place were ready to spring back. And so once the reopenings started, there was an eagerness on the part of businesses to do so, although, of course, to put it in context, which you essentially already have done, as you pointed out, there was actually 22 million jobs down in March and April, and now we're for May and June, we're 7.5 million up. So we do indeed have a long way to climb.
The US sure does. And we also know that there is this surge in coronavirus cases that's happening across the US right now, quite a worrying development. Now, do you expect that this rise in infections will have an impact on the jobs numbers going forward?
Well, it's obviously a lot is clearly in the hands of the powers that be, of the politicians. So clearly it will put some brake on progress. But I still anticipate 7-figure gains. And with respect to the worrying trend, I do follow that closely, worrying trend, as you point out, in coronavirus cases. It's a little bit misleading in the sense that deaths are way down. It appears that what seems to be happening is that people at age 35, give or take, are developing mild cases, having short stays in hospitals, but that's beginning to scare the politicians. But given that it's striking people of that kind who are going to bars and restaurants and catching some of it, but not dying from it, being emitted from the hospitals fairly quickly, I believe that once it's become clear that it's not leading to a whole lot of deaths, and that in fact it might even be leading to more general herd immunity, I believe that I'm somewhat optimistic that the politicians in charge will strike a new note and begin to pull back on some of their tightening in Texas and elsewhere. So I'm less worried about that than many people seem to be.
Okay, and we heard there US President Donald Trump quick to take the credit for the impressive jobs figures for May and for June. Is there anything to suggest that the Trump administration can be attributed to the positive effect we're seeing on the jobs market right now?
Well, very little credit can be given him for any of this. Certainly, or indeed, not really a whole lot of blame in a sense, because the lockdowns. I have to take issue with one of the ways in which you put it. The COVID-19 pandemic is not what caused the immense increase in unemployment and the collapse in jobs. It was the lockdowns. Whatever you think of the lockdowns, we clearly know that it was the lockdowns, and that's why I'm calling this the Great Suppression. And I do want to note one particular fact buried in the unemployment numbers that stares you in the face if you look at it closely. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does a breakdown for the share of people who are unemployed who say that they are on temporary layoff. Now, obviously, there are a
Yes.
lot of people on permanent layoff, a lot of people who've just entered the labor force. The unemployed consist of a whole lot of different categories. But take the category on temporary layoff. It's rarely higher at any period than 12% of the unemployed. About 12% are on temporary layoff.
Okay.
This time around, it was nearly 60% in June, and it was more than 70% in May. Temporary layoff. So is almost the single most important statistic that tells you what the nature of this Great Suppression really is about. That temporary layoffs will mean that these people will come back to their jobs once the lockdowns are lifted. But to get back to your point, Trump is clearly worried about the Great Suppression, about the double-digit unemployment
Yes.
rate, worried for his election chances, and so he's hoping. Now, of course, as you know, and as everybody else knows, he was planning to run on the idea of the great economy, and that's been deeply disappointing to him that he can no longer do so. So at least he's trying to crow about the fact that the economy is coming back, and indeed it is,
Okay.
but at a much slower rate than anybody would
Okay.
hope.
I'm sorry, Gene Epstein. We'll have to leave it
Sure,
there. But thank you so
sure,
much for joining us on the
sure,
program. Hope to have you back
sure.
soon.